As this says in the publisher's letter in Sports Illustrated in the 70s, I was indeed the office unicyclist. But beyond that, I was also the baseball reporter. A woman, baseball reporter, 1970s. No sport is written about as prosaically, over centuries, poetically, as baseball. And what do we most often hear when the arc of baseball is narratively explained? Baseball is for fathers and sons playing catch. This diamond encircles what we are, joining the long generations of all of the fathers and all of the sons. Well, when the men went away to fight war, the women got to play. But look what they had to play in. They played in skirts. They had to do makeup classes, etiquette classes. When they slid into second base, you can see why the men filled the stands. Okay, so the men come home from war, the women go off the baseball field, and it's about the 70s when I show up. But why do I show up? My story is a story of mother to daughter, not father to son. My story is about this pinprick you see in this picture of Ted Williams. My mother ordered the pictures of all the baseball players in the 40s for the Red Sox, and she pinned them to the cornice of her bedroom so that when she listened to the games on the radio, and when she scored them, and when she collected the stories the next day to go into her scrapbook next to the scorecard that she kept, she was living baseball. And she brought it to me, as you will find out a little later on. So where are we today? We're going to jump ahead from the 70s and look at where we are today, because so much has happened in just the last 2 years. I want to say, what took us so long? But let's celebrate where we are today. This is a picture from this season when the first female Major League Baseball coach actually took the field during a game. And the first baseman left his base, walked over to shake her hand, recognizing the historic moment that this was. Kim Ning, 40 years in the game, 40 years, always, maybe she'll be the next GM. Finally, a few years ago, she was named GM of the Miami Marlins. Rachel Balkovec, just this year, became the manager of the Yankees affiliate, Major League Baseball manager. In Boston, imagine in Boston of all places, which took so long to get the first black player in Major League Baseball, we have 2 women working as coaches in the baseball team at Fenway Park. And here we have it. It never would have been imagined back in my day. Women are actually officially scoring baseball games. And in the minor leagues of several affiliates, this happens to be Australia, but in America too, women are pitching. Journalists have finally made it from the sidelines to the broadcast booth, led off by Jessica Mendoza, an Olympic softball player, and followed now by many others. And I'm happy to say there is an incredible pipeline coming up through the minor leagues of women in the broadcast booth. Here we had last summer, they had the all-female broadcast crew the first time in an MLB history to call a game. Okay, let's go back. Let's go back. My story about baseball in 1978. Okay, there I am, supposedly on the bench in the clubhouse. The story's more complicated. Here we go. I say, the good old days when we were locked out and women were court-bound to gain locker room access. The woman who was court-bound was me. I was the plaintiff in the case in the federal courts called Ludtke v. Kuhn. Let's figure out how it happened. First of all, let's just note that I was typing on a typewriter. That pretty much dates us right here. We're in the 70s, aren't we? And I was the one of two baseball reporters for Sports Illustrated at the time, making me the only full-time woman baseball reporter in the country. All right, let me take you back to 1976. This is before I got in trouble at Yankee Stadium. I went to Kaminsky Park. I was sent out on an assignment with Roger Kahn, wrote The Boys of Summer. I was to travel with him for 2 weeks. We get to Kaminsky Park, the first stop on our 2-week trip. I go to the press box. He goes to the press box. He's sitting with Bill Veeck, the owner of the team. I'm a couple rows up. And one of the writers, he writes this later in a book called October Men. He said, one writer came up and said intensely into my ear, "Your girlfriend doesn't belong here. You know that. What do you think this is? Ladies' night at the Turkish bath." Later that night, we were supposed to meet up with Bill Veeck in the Bard's room. This is where the writers go after the game to have a few drinks after they filed their stories. Again, Roger Kahn was called up by the bartender, and this time he was told that unless I left, he could not stay. And Roger again wrote in his inimitable way, "It was as though I had brought a harlot into the temple." Okay, so just note, this is not about access to locker rooms. These are both places where no one that I know would be changing their clothes, either the press box or the Bard's room. So here are two unlikely fellows who were incredibly supportive of me. Mickey Morabito, he was my age, he was a rookie PR person, and Billy Martin, the tempestuous 4-time manager of the New York Yankees. Mickey Morabito listened to me when I would come to him and talk about the frustrations I had in not being able to access the athletes to do interviews because all of the interviews were held in the clubhouse. By mid-season, Mickey has come to me and said, "I can't get you into the clubhouse, but I can go in and let you in a side door, and I will take you into Billy Martin's office after the game. You can stay there as long as you want, and you can at least have that." And I said, okay, we're making progress. You will note here, when you see the Yankees locker room, that this area where the showers are, the toilets are, the sauna is, no reporters, male or female, are allowed there. So the area that I was looking to get into was the locker room. So now we come to the 77 World Series. I have a press pass that says I have access to the clubhouse, but I also know that the Los Angeles Dodgers have no woman covering them. And so out of courtesy to them, I go to the club and I explain that I might come into the clubhouse afterwards, and that by then the Yankees had given me a clubhouse pass and they were accustomed to me coming in. So Tommy John, the player rep, asks the players what they think, tells them the story, and they vote, and they say, yes, of course she has a right to be there. On the 5th inning of that game, this man, Commissioner Bowie Kuhn, overrules the players of both teams, the votes they've taken and the policies they've set up, and he says permission was never granted because I didn't grant it. So by the 6th game of the 1977 World Series, the men have come together and they've decided that what I really need to help me out is a male escort. And so this man becomes my male escort. He's a PR person for the Philadelphia Phillies. So after the 6th game, Reggie Jackson has hit 3 home runs, brought the World Championship back to the Yankees. Here he is in the locker room with all the guys, and here I am where the boxes are. I am stuck outside the door without a cell phone, I might add. So when he goes in to find a player for me, I have no idea if he's coming back out. He did bring 2 utility players out to me. This place was filled with fans. It was a cacophonous sound. The players couldn't hear me. I couldn't hear them. I was crushed against the door. And in the meantime, Reggie Jackson comes out an hour and 45 minutes later. He says, "Melissa, I've said all I have to say. I'm going downtown." So here comes my judge. we end up making a decision, we, meaning Sports Illustrated, after we realized that there's no negotiating with baseball at this point. Baseball has decided that separate is equal. And we say separate is not equal. And so, when we decide to file our suit in Southern District Federal Court, by a spin of this wheel, my judge, Judge Constance Baker Motley, is assigned my case. She knows a little something about separate isn't equal. She wrote the brief for Brown versus Board of Education in 1950s. And she was an extraordinary lawyer herself in terms of racial discrimination, worked side by side with Thurgood Marshall. She was also the first African-American woman ever made a federal judge in the US. She was the first woman to serve on this distinguished court, the Southern District Court, and she was the only woman on that court when this wheel spun and her name came out. Give you an idea, she took on a case in 1962 to desegregate Ole Miss, representing James Meredith. Thurgood Marshall never thought she'd win it. He gave it to her with laughter, just sort of saying, "You'll never win this case." Ketanji Brown Jackson has said that Constance Baker Motley, were it a different day, would have been the first black woman appointed to the Supreme Court. I just want to put you in the cultural milieu. While our case is kind of happening in the court, here's what's happening in the world outside. Charles Schulz does a few cartoons about it with a little dialogue with Lucy and Charlie. The Tonight Show, Betty White, with a towel wrapped around her, is headed for the showers with Johnny Carson. And on Saturday Night Live, O.J. Simpson, towel around his neck, missing from other parts, Lorraine Newman do a skit filled with all sorts of sexual puns. Judge Motley decides in our favor on September 25th, 1978, and you can see that the headline writers still hadn't gone past the sexual puns. There is no mention whatsoever of it being an equal rights case. You can see again the threats that it's posing. Patrick Buchanan has a column that's widely syndicated, and it's all about how this case is going to mean that no one is safe, and relating it to the ERA battle that's happening. The only time the men are concerned about equal rights is when they say, where are our equal rights? Why can't we go in the women's locker room? Well, they had equal rights because no one went in the locker rooms of the women's sports. So let me go back just for a moment. That's my mother. I want to return to this story for just a moment as I close out my talk. When I was born in 1951, my mother was in Iowa. Her father, with whom she went to games at Fenway Park, and who made her the baseball fan that she was, writes a letter to her after the Red Sox and the Yankees have finished their 3-game series. And in that letter, he spells my name wrong, welcomes me to the world, and then proceeds to give my mother a play-by-play of the doubleheader that the Red Sox have just won at Fenway Park. It is from this letter that I have discerned that the baseball DNA was in me at birth. So now I want to talk about baseball daughters and her story. You'll see my daughter here sitting on my lap at Fenway Park. You'll also see her at Cooperstown at the Hall of Fame. I invited her to come when the first woman, Claire Smith, ever to be inducted into the Hall of Fame for her writing had her ceremony. And my daughter got to witness that, and I was there as Claire's guest. So what my wish is that my daughter and other daughters will grow up to have the opportunities that these women today have carved out for them. Beth Mowens in the broadcast booth, producers on the field, announcers, women. Here's a producer at the hockey game. Erin Andrews on the football field. Producers behind the scenes at ESPN. And my great dear friend, Susan Waldman, who has been in the Yankee radio broadcast booth for 15 seasons. So I'm going to dedicate this talk to a woman you have never met, but I hope after tonight you will never forget her. She's a fictional character. Her name is Katie Casey, and she was the fictionalized girlfriend of Jack Norwood, who wrote Take Me Out to the Ball Game. So let's look at the lyrics that you never sing at the ballpark, and I want you never to forget them, because it was actually a song about a woman who loved baseball. Katie Casey was baseball mad. She had the fever, she had it bad. Just to root for the hometown crew every cent that Katie spent. On a Saturday, her young beau called to see if she'd like to see a show. But Miss Katie said, no, I'll tell you what you can do. So let's all sing the verse of, let's go. Take me out to the ball game.
Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
Thank you.